Like, if you want Natasha Cloud, why did you not sign Natasha Cloud? I'm just putting it out there. Like, for dear Steph White, if you wanted Natasha Cloud, why did you not sign Natasha Cloud? You could have traded Caitlin Clark for whoever you wanted. You could have picked any player in the league to trade Caitlin Clark. If you wanted Natasha Cloud, why did you not just sign Natasha Cloud? Like, how exactly is the only time this team looks good as a team is when Caitlin Clark goes rogue and says, fuck your system, I'm feeling it, and runs a pick and roll, runs in isolation, runs in transition.
Something snapped inside that arena, and nobody in that building was ready for it. Not the coaches, not the players, not the thousands of fans who showed up expecting to watch basketball and instead witnessed the quiet beginning of what might be the most dramatic unraveling in WNBA history. The clipboard hit the floor before anyone even processed what they'd just seen. Stephanie White stood there, frozen for half a second, and in that half second, everything changed. Because Caitlin Clark had just looked at the bench, seen the play being signaled, and decided, in front of everyone, that she wasn't running it. Now here's what you need to understand before we go any further. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't confusion. This was a choice deliberate, calculated, and loaded with meaning. And the moment it happened, every single person in that organization felt it differently. The coaching staff felt it as a betrayal. The players felt it as a release. And somewhere in the back of his mind, every front office executive in the league felt it as a warning. Because when a player of Caitlin Clark's caliber stops listening, it doesn't just mean a team is losing games. It means something structural has collapsed. Something that can't be fixed with a film session or a closed-door meeting. And what makes this story genuinely terrifying for the Indiana Fever is that Clark wasn't wrong to do it. That's the part nobody wants to say out loud. She went rogue, and it worked. The offense opened up. The court breathed for the first time all night. The defense didn't know where to look. For 3 minutes, the Fever looked like the best team in the league, and all it took was their star player completely ignoring her coach. Think about what that means. Really sit with it. Because that is not a sustainable situation. That is a time bomb wearing a jersey. To understand how things got this dark this fast, you have to go back to the fundamental mismatch that was hiding in plain sight from the very beginning. Stephanie White is not a bad coach. Let's be clear about that. She is methodical, disciplined, and genuinely brilliant at making basketball ugly in ways that suffocate opponents. She built her coaching identity on grit, on grinding possessions down to their bones, on making every single bucket feel like a war. And for certain rosters in certain eras, that philosophy wins. But then the Fever drafted Caitlin Clark. And here's where the story gets complicated, because drafting Clark wasn't just adding a player. It was adding a philosophy. A completely different, almost opposite way of seeing basketball. Clark's entire game is built on pace, on chaos controlled with precision, on using her gravitational pull to collapse defenses before they can set up. She needs space to breathe and speed to think. She thrives in the fire of a broken play, in the kind of improvised moment where everyone else freezes and she somehow already knows what's coming next. Put those two philosophies in the same building and you don't get balance. You get friction. Constant, exhausting, invisible friction that shows up in the box score as turnovers and contested shots and lineups that somehow look worse the more talent you add to them. And for a while, the Fever managed to hide this friction under the surface. The 2024 season had enough chaos and enough lucky collapses from opponents that the cracks never fully showed. They dragged themselves to the playoffs not because they were great, but because they were annoying, physical, and caught teams on bad nights. That isn't a foundation. That's a borrowed house. And in 2025, the landlord came to collect. The numbers started telling the story weeks before anyone wanted to admit it. When Clark stepped off the floor, the Fever didn't just slow down, they disintegrated. An 18-3 run by the Liberty. 18-3. In minutes. Gone. Every lead, every ounce of momentum, every reason the opposing coach was worried, all of it evaporating the second Clark sat down. And what's even more unsettling is what happened on the other side of that equation. When Clark was on the court without Kelsey Mitchell, the team ran a +10. +10. Against the same competition that was embarrassing them in other stretches. That number is a quiet verdict. It doesn't scream. It just sits there patient and damning, waiting for someone in the organization to look at it honestly. And the most painful part of all of this, the part that should make every Fever fan feel something uncomfortable in their chest, is that Clark's own teammates were hesitant to give her the ball. In the final 3 minutes of a critical stretch, the most dangerous playmaker on the floor barely touched it. Barely touched it. You have to ask yourself how that happens. How a team watches their star get frozen out in a moment that calls for exactly what she does best. And the answer, when you strip everything else away, is culture. When a coaching system runs deep enough and long enough, it rewires how players think in real time. The Fever players didn't consciously decide to ignore Clark. They just defaulted to what felt safe, to the system they knew, to the gritty, methodical rhythm that Stephanie White had drilled into them since day one. And Clark was standing right there, watching, waiting, feeling the game slipping away one slow possession at a time. That's when something shifted in her. That's what produced the moment with the clipboard. But here's the twist nobody's talking about. The real problem isn't Clark going rogue. The real problem is what happens after. Because White doesn't see a player making a smart read in a desperate moment. She sees a fundamental challenge to her authority. She sees a fracture in the chain of command that, if left unanswered, will spread through the entire roster like a crack through glass. And coaches like Stephanie White do not respond to that by loosening the reins. They respond by tightening them, which means the next game after Clark goes rogue, and it works, the system gets stricter. The play calls get more rigid. The freedom gets smaller. And Clark gets more suffocated, not less. It's a cycle with no clean exit, and both people in it are following their own logic perfectly. That's what makes it genuinely tragic. Neither of them is the villain here. But together, in this specific situation, they might be destroying something irreplaceable. Let's talk about Kelsey Mitchell for a moment, because her story inside all of this is being overlooked, and it matters more than people realize. Mitchell was the star before Clark arrived. She was the engine, the identity, the one the offense ran through when things got hard. And to her enormous credit, when Clark showed up in 2024, Mitchell evolved. She became an off-the-ball specialist. She moved without the ball. She found her shots in the gaps Clark opened. It worked. It was beautiful to watch. And then something changed. Call it the coaching pressure returning to its default shape. Call it muscle memory taking over under stress. Whatever the reason, Mitchell has regressed back to the pre-Clark version of herself. High-volume isolation. Dribbling into traffic. Trying to manufacture something from nothing while Clark stands 30 feet away, open, waiting, watching the shot clock drain. When Mitchell goes into that mode, the ball stops moving. And when the ball stops moving in a Caitlin Clark offense, it's not just a bad possession. It's a betrayal of physics. Clark's entire value is predicated on constant motion, constant threat, constant unpredictability. The moment she becomes static, the defense relaxes. And a relaxed defense against a team with no system is a nightmare that unfolds in slow motion. The substitution patterns have made everything exponentially worse. There was a stretch in a recent game that almost defies explanation. The Fever go on a 9-0 run with Clark off the floor. Wait, let that land, they score more efficiently without their best player. Then Clark comes back in and they go on a 9-3 skid. Now here's the part that gets really interesting. Clark wasn't even involved in most of those possessions. She was being used as a decoy. A decoy. The woman who might be the most unguardable offensive force the WNBA has ever seen was standing on the wing while teammates took contested mid-range jumpers with 15 seconds left on the shot clock. You can't write a more painful sentence than that if you're a Fever fan. And Stephanie White's response was to keep shuffling lineups, to micromanage seconds and possessions and matchups in a way that would make sense with a roster of role players who need constant direction. But Clark is not a role player. She is a floor general. She reads defenses the way most people read text messages, instantly, effortlessly, and already 3 steps ahead of the conversation. When you overcoach a player like that, you're not helping them. You're caging them. And the audience can feel the cage even from the nosebleeds. Here's where this story takes its darkest turn. There's a significant portion of Fever fans who genuinely believe that when the playoffs arrive, White will adapt. That the moment the stakes get high enough, She'll finally give Clark the keys and let her drive. And that belief, as warm and hopeful as it sounds, is almost certainly wrong. Because coaches don't reinvent their philosophies under pressure. They run toward them. When the moment feels biggest, a coach like White doesn't experiment. She leans into everything she knows, everything she trusts, everything she's built her career on. Which means the playoff version of the Indiana Fever, if they get there, might be the most suffocated version of Caitlin Clark we've ever seen on a professional court. And that thought should send a chill through the entire organization, because the window for this won't stay open forever. The league is watching. The competitors are studying. And every team that watches the Fever fumble this knows exactly how to defend a Clark who can't push pace, can't freelance, and can't feel the game in real time. She becomes manageable. And manageable is the one thing she was never supposed to be. The locker room has started feeling the weight of all of this in ways that go beyond basketball. Players are human, and they can feel the invisible lines being drawn. When a star goes rogue, and it visibly works, every player on the floor processes that information. They see it. They feel the shift in energy. They watch the crowd wake up. And then the timeout comes, the system returns, and the energy dies. Do that enough times, and players stop trusting the system instinctively, even if they never say it out loud. The trust doesn't break dramatically. It erodes. Quietly. One possession at a time. Until one day the coach draws up a play in a timeout and feels the room listening with their ears but not with their belief. That moment might already be closer than anyone in the Fever organization wants to admit. Now here's the thing about going rogue that nobody in sports media wants to fully say. Clark's decision to ignore that play call was not just a basketball move. It was communication. The kind of communication that happens when every other channel has been tried and exhausted. She had been saying something through her play, through her body language, through the gap between what the offense designed and what the defense was actually giving. And nobody was hearing it. So she said it in the one language everyone understands. She just did it her way, live in front of everyone, and let the results make the argument. The results made the argument. And now the Fever sit at a crossroads that feels less like a fork in the road and more like a cliff edge. The path forward requires someone to move first. Either White finds a way to build an offense that uses Clark as an engine rather than a decoration, or Clark's best basketball gets quietly buried under a system designed for a different kind of player. History in professional sports is ruthless about this kind of standoff. We've seen it before, a generational talent dropped into the wrong system, both sides stubbornly committed to their version of the truth, and by the time anyone blinks, the window is gone. The talent moves on, the coach gets a different job, and the franchise spends years wondering what could have been if someone had simply been willing to bend first. The Fever have something in Caitlin Clark that franchises spend decades praying for. She doesn't just fill arenas. She changes the cultural gravity of a league. She makes people who never watched basketball buy jerseys and set reminders and argue about plays on social media at midnight. That kind of talent doesn't come with an instruction manual. It comes with a responsibility to build the world around it instead of forcing it to shrink into the world you already built. And right now, that responsibility is not being honored. Every time Clark has to go rogue just to save a game, it isn't just a basketball moment. It's an indictment. A flare gun fired into the sky above Indianapolis saying something is wrong down here, and we need someone to fix it before it's too late. The fans have felt it. The analysts have felt it. Even the opposing coaches have felt it. You can see it in how they scheme against Indiana. They don't respect the system. They respect Clark. They build their entire game plan around neutralizing her because they know if they can do that, the rest of the Fever offense will politely cooperate in its own defeat. That asymmetry where the star is bigger than the team's identity only gets resolved one of two ways. Either the team grows to match the star, or the star gets smaller to fit the team. And you don't make Caitlin Clark smaller. You just don't. Not if you care about winning. Not if you care about what this franchise could become. Not if you understand that you are standing inside a moment that the Indiana Fever may not see again for a generation. So we come back to that clipboard on the floor. That sound echoing through the arena. That frozen expression on Stephanie White's face somewhere between fury and disbelief. Because maybe the most honest way to read that moment isn't as a breakdown. Maybe it's a beginning. Maybe Clark going rogue wasn't the team fracturing. Maybe it was the team finally telling the truth. And the only question that matters now, the one that will define this franchise for the next decade, is whether anyone in that organization is brave enough to listen. The smoke is rising from the wreckage. The question isn't whether there was a crash. The question is what they choose to build from the ruins.